Ayo YouTube, Flowcat here, and today I wanted to give an update to my thoughts and opinions on Honkai Star Rail. I have played a lot more of the game since my first impressions video, and I have also updated my impressions on the game. Some of my opinions remain the same, but some of them have changed quite a bit, so I hope you stick around to see what I think. Also, I'm trying a new thing. At the end of this video, I'm gonna highlight comments. There are often some pretty great discussions happening in my comment section. I like to encourage open discourse and friendly open discourse where you're not just screaming at each other in a comment section over differences of opinion. So I wanted to showcase some of that today. At the end of this video, I have some highlighted comments, 5, I think, maybe 4 or 5 that I'm gonna share with you, and I'll give my thoughts on their thoughts and their thoughts on the game. Either way, here are my updated opinion. First, let's start with the story. I will say I'm not going to spoil anything, not going to do any specific details. I'm just going to talk about the general opinions and thoughts and feelings on it. So I've completed the first story arc of the game. I have to say, I am very impressed with it. It was well written. The tone was a lot more mature than Genshin. I will say the game is a lot more text focused than Genshin. In a lot of old school RPGs, they didn't have the animations to make things visually work, so they would just put in the text box, you see this person walk forward and stab so-and-so and blah, 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 blah. So they do a similar approach here where you don't always see things happening on the screen. A lot of it can be text-based and described. But yeah, the detail is really well done. And also the pacing is well done, which is a nice thing to see. Sometimes when games go for like detailed stories and interactions with characters, they tend to bog it down with too much, and that destroys the pacing where you feel like you're slogging through 100 conversations every time something happens. You got to get everyone's opinion. You got to, do all this stuff, and it gets really tiresome. That's not the case here. The pacing is pretty consistent and even picks up as time goes, which is nice to see. But again, there is still an attention to detail, and the way that they manage to keep the pacing with that level of detail is partially with lots of optional interactions and conversations that you can completely miss. There are entire side conversations that you can choose to have or not have with characters, and there pretty much is no consequence to the story. Obviously, it doesn't really change anything. It just gives you more context, more information, depending on, what you choose to do. Now, personally, I like this, but I do feel like it makes me a little nervous that I'm gonna miss something, because I'm one of those people where I want to find all the, I want all the conversations. I want to learn all the things. I want to see all the stuffs. Okay. So I get really nervous if there's like optional interactions. Like, what if there's an optional interaction that I just totally miss and I never get to see? But on the other hand, for other people, I can see it being one of those things where the optional interactions are just something they never want to do and they skip it constantly, which leaves them at a severe lack of understanding for like certain things that are going on. I don't think this will be a huge issue. Like, if you miss all the side conversations, they reiterate the important stuff in the main story when it is important. But there are plenty of things that you can learn in these side conversations that will just never come up in the main story, and it's often contextual or background knowledge based. But yeah, sometimes it can give you sort of a different perspective on what's going on, and I can see some people being kind of confused with the story when they skip a lot of these optional interactions. What I do want to say though is that the beginning of the game is kind of rough. You pop into existence and everyone's just tossing nouns at you left and right. There are so many proper nouns in this game, and that's not unusual for an RPG. That's not unusual for a fantasy game. I just feel like they start hitting you hard with the proper nouns, and it's up to you to figure out what exactly those mean. Like, I'm only vaguely familiar with a lot of the organizations and entities in the game. Like, you have the Interastral Peace Organization, and they're essentially like the Universal Police, the Galaxy Police, and they also handle trade regulations and lots of other things. And I've learned a lot of that from side conversations. And most of the time in the main game, they're just referred to as the IPC. And the characters don't go, the IPC, the Interastral Peace Organization, with blah, 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 blah. They don't like always expand on that. So I just feel like there is a ton of context, a ton of information, a ton of lore that can be swept aside and missed, which will detract from your enjoyment of the game, I think. But it's probably better that it's not forcing you to do it. Okay, I'm rambling, but yeah, okay. Point is, the beginning of the game is a little rough. It's kind of slow on the story end of things, and I had trouble getting invested in what was going on. I generally felt confused, and I didn't really feel like I had a lot of strong motivation in the story until I got about halfway through the first arc. Once I hit about halfway through the first arc, what you're experiencing in the game, in the story, is enough to create character motivation where you're like, yeah, I want to do the thing. I want to save the world. I want to help the people. And, that's good. That does give more emotion to the events that are going on, and it makes you feel like, yeah, I want to do the thing, But in the very beginning of the game, it kind of tosses you in, and I feel that it's a little bit hard to get into, and that beginning section is kind of long. Like it's quite a bit to go through at the very start. When you start out in Genshin Impact, you start out seeing this crazy fight scene. The next thing you know, you're in a bizarre land, and it's like, find your sibling. You have motivation. You start out the gate with like, yeah, I need to go find my sibling. We fought this big fight. We don't know what's going on. So it's like you start out very, very much motivated. In this game, it doesn't feel like you really gain that motivation until maybe 6 to 10 hours into the story. And I don't know if a lot of people are going to wait around to hit that point, wait around for it to get good. You know what I mean? Okay, let's move on from story. I want to talk about combat. The combat is more complicated than I initially thought. Big surprise. And I enjoy the complexity of it. I do think that it doesn't have a lot of unique systems in the game. A lot of it is very, very traditional RPG elements. You have very traditional RPG roles. So there's not really a lot of unique stuff going on in that, other than that the character designs are pretty great, and like the animation work is really good. So all of that stuff is good, but yeah, the basic combat system is very much your traditional turn-based RPG system. Where I feel like the complexity comes in is with building your units. And so this might be kind of the idea with Star Rail, is that they put more complexity on the units builds themselves, and they made the actual combat more of just a consequence of how you built your units. It's not as deep on the actual combat side of things. It's more deep on the theory crafting side of things, on like how you're putting your units together, how you're managing your resources, how you're leveling up your talents. That kind of stuff will pay out dividends in the actual combat itself. I see examples of this like the dual relic system, which I will talk about more in just a moment, but there's also the traces system, which is like the talent system in Genshin, but you can see that there are different kinds of upgrades in this talent tree than you see in the talent system in Genshin. When you level up a talent in Genshin, you get just a boost to its effect. That's all you get. You just get, yep, more damage, or yep, more healing, or more shield, or whatever. But in Star Rail, the traces can do that as well. You can level up just your damage. You can just level up the level of your skill or ultimate or basic attack. But there are also these sort of like side traces or whatever, and some of them require crowns, so I think they sort of replaced the crowning system in the game, but they provide unique bonuses to the character's kit that are more than just a damage thing. So like one of these for Natasha, for instance, which becomes basically necessary later on, is the ability to remove a debuff from an ally when she uses her skill. This adds an entire additional effect to her skill. In addition to healing your teammates, now you can cleanse them, which is pretty nice, and it's satisfying when you unlock these talents because the effect is immediately noticeable. Like I got Branya, for example, and one of her talents makes her auto attack, her basic attack with her gun, always crit, which is pretty nice. I mean, that's immediately noticeable, especially early on when I'm dealing with like at most 20% crit rate on my units, and I have a unit that can just always crit no matter what. So for her, she's going to be getting all my crit damage artifacts, and I bet that will scale up her damage a lot as time goes on. But that's not the only place where there's complexity, like the trace system. There's also complexity within the dual relic system, and I am going to talk about this now because it's starting to make me nervous, okay? In Genshin Impact, you have artifacts that you have to farm, the infamous artifacts, and they are entirely RNG based. You get a main stat that you're hunting for, but not only that, you're trying to hunt for substats. So basically you're trying to get, stats that are relevant to the character that you're building. If they're a tank, you want defense stats. If they're a DPS, you want attack stats, and that's very generalized. But that system is, in Honkai Star Rail as well, except they added another layer to it. In Genshin Impact, you have 5 artifacts, and you can build up to a 4-piece bonus. So one of your artifacts is sort of like just for free. It can be whatever set bonus, it doesn't matter. And the other 4 align together to create a 2-piece and a 4-piece set bonus, or a 2-piece and another 2-piece set bonus. In Honkai Star Rail, you have 6 relic slots. They combine together to create a 2-piece bonus and a 4-piece bonus. But then the other 2 slots combine together to create another 2-piece bonus. This is really hard to explain. So you have the same issue where you're hunting for main stats and you're hunting for substats, but now you have 6 slots. You have essentially a 6-piece bonus with 0 flex slots. This means that all your base 4 slots have to be the same set, and your relic pieces have to also be the same set. Now, the saving grace for this is that your 4-piece it doesn't go to a 6-piece. Like, you don't need 6 of the same set. You need 4 of your base set, I guess, and then you get the other 2 relics through your simulated universe. See, like, this is already just like way more complicated than Genshin Impact. There's only one way to farm artifacts in Genshin Impact. There are 2 different ways to farm relics in Honkai Star Rail, and not only that, but you need perfect sets. You can't have off pieces. There are no off pieces in this game. You can't do that. They got rid of that for Star Rail. And there's more oh boy. It seems like relic farming is going to be, in some ways, a lot more time consuming and a lot more frustrating than Genshin Impact. And it's already frustrating in Genshin Impact. So I guess we'll just have to see how it all shakes out. I don't know, maybe they did something behind the scenes, maybe they fiddled with some numbers, and maybe the relic farming won't be as terrible as I think it will be. Having to deal with a 4-piece bonus plus another 2-piece bonus while hunting for specific main stats, while hunting for specific substats, with 0 off pieces that you're allowed to use. Oh, it really does just sound like you need a perfect storm of good luck to get something useful. Okay, so I'm gonna move on beyond the relic talk. I want to talk about how the simulated universe and the Forgotten Halls create a really nice dichotomy. I was worried about the lack of exploration, and I was worried that they weren't going to add enough side content for you to do on a weekly or bi-weekly basis to really make the game have any playability outside of the story. That was a big concern of mine. I'm gonna admit that has been partially alleviated. There is what you would consider a spiral abyss in this game called the Forgotten Halls. There's also a thing called the simulated universe, which is an entirely separate thing, and they play off of each other very well. Let me explain. The simulated universe is this sort of roguelite style experience where you are progressing through a series of stages of enemies that get progressively harder, and you're grabbing buffs and upgrades along the way to try to make the content easier for you to clear. I find this content to be pretty enjoyable because the RNG aspects of grabbing different buffs and having to upgrade them and, managing resources within your run makes each experience with the simulated universe feel pretty unique and interesting. The bosses at the end are pretty tough, and there are elites that can happen along the way, which are also pretty tough. So overall, it is a very challenging and interesting game mode that I enjoy. So that's the simulated universe. The kind of enemies that you are fighting and the environments that you're fighting in seem dictated by like this world mechanic. Like there's world 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I've only gotten up to world 3. I know someone in my Discord that has attempted world 5 and got to the boss and then immediately regretted it. But essentially every week you get rewards from clearing the simulated universe, you get points for clearing each of the different worlds, and then you get ability points that you can spend, which you can use to make your teams even more powerful while within the simulated universe. And overall, it's a pretty fun feedback loop, and it resets weekly with pretty decent rewards, so it's definitely not something you want to sleep on. It also seems like you get more point rewards for clearing the later worlds, so I'm guessing once we're high level, we'll only have to clear like world 6 once, and that'll give you all of your weekly rewards. And then you can run some of the lower level worlds if you want for like extra monster drops, or if you want to fill out your index to like get more jade. You can sort of farm the simulated universe. Every time you grab a blessing and every time you grab a curio, you unlock essentially jade within the index machine. So you want to make sure that you're doing that. It's definitely an easy way to farm jade early on. Just run world 1 and grab all the buffs that you normally wouldn't grab in a serious run because they suck. Also the same thing with curio. There are some curio that I think just suck. So like world 1 is level 16. You can take your level 40 units there, decimate everything, make some jade, get some monster drops, and it's a good time. Okay, so Forgotten Halls is completely different in the sense that it is a single, more difficult fight. And the goal is to beat that fight in as few turns as possible. So this is what we would consider the Spiral Abyss, where like DPS is everything. And yeah, so you want to be as focused on strategy as possible in the Forgotten Halls. It's not about buffs that you're getting and RNG stuff and all of that. In the Forgotten Halls, it's about, you know, matching up your weaknesses with the enemy's weaknesses. It's about making sure that your team has a balanced composition so that you have enough supports, enough damage to get through the fight. And overall, it's a nice change of pace from the simulated universe. It's just right to it. You know, you just spawn in, the enemy's right there, you run up, you do the fight. It's often like an elite or a boss fight, so they're pretty challenging. They take a lot of strategy. And yeah, that's pretty much all I gotta say about that one. I think I enjoy the simulated universe more just because I think there's more going on there and it's a little more entertaining. But the Forgotten Halls is also a very valuable source of jade. Okay, so those are my overall thoughts on the game so far. That was a lot of stuff, but I want to get into the sort of like the foundational thoughts here. I was originally concerned about the amount of content in the game in general, and now I do feel like, yeah, there's enough daily, weekly, bi-weekly content to get you going, to get you playing the game and doing the stuff, but I just am not sure how long people are going to hold on to the game. So this is kind of giving me a lot of vibes like Genshin 1.0, and I just sort of want to say it like this. Like, if you start Genshin today, the amount of content that you have to complete is triple, maybe even quadruple, maybe even 5 times. That's excessive. It's probably like triple or quadruple what we had in Genshin 1.0. It's I don't know, it's a lot. There's a lot more story, there's a lot more side quests, there's a lot more exploration, there are a ton more characters to build. There's just a lot to do in Genshin at this point because they've been building on it for years. But if you are someone that has played Genshin since 1.0, then you may have felt consistently bored throughout the 3 years of the game, even though if you look at it in its entirety, there's a lot of content. So I would say my biggest concern at this point for Honkai Star Rail is the pacing of the big updates. Like for Genshin Impact, we get a new region once a year, which is a very long time between the big content updates. Now, back in Genshin 1.0, they did a pretty poor job of filling the time between major updates, and we had many people quit in the famous content droughts of Genshin Impact, where there was just nothing to do for months on end except silly little events that take 10 minutes and add nothing to your gameplay experience. Since then, they have come a long way and figured out many strategies to fill the time, to the point where I don't feel like the content drought is really that big of an issue with Genshin anymore. But I can see it being extremely bothersome for people in Honkai Star Rail at this point, because at this point there's enough content to kind of start to fall in love with the game, and then it's gonna run out and you're gonna be stuck waiting for the next big content update. What I'm hoping is one of two things. The first one would be quite simply just putting out that content faster. I mean, there's less seemingly asset wise for them to put together for Honkai Star Rail. Just like generally speaking, I think that because there's no exploration, there's no free roam, open world mechanics and all that stuff, I think it kind of simplifies the level design a lot for them. And you know, they seem pretty willing to reuse assets in specific zones, so they don't seem like they're too worried about making a bunch of really unique assets everywhere you go. And for that reason, it seems like they can focus on the story and they can maybe put out a new region at a faster pace. If they can do that, if they can put out a new region every like 6 months or something like that, that will help immensely with filling the time between those updates and making sure that people don't just get sick of waiting for new stuff. And the other solution, which could be used in tandem with the first solution, is that the events have to be taken more seriously with Honkai Star Rail. I think that the tone of the game does not do well to have events that are just like silly little mini games that you finish in 10 minutes and you're done. I don't think that a lot of the people that play Honkai Star Rail are going to be interested in a lot of that content. They're probably going to be interested in more like story related events, like events that broaden the backstory of characters, or events that, you know, have more to do with the combat and the strategy end of things. I just think that if they're able to create events that are on a bigger scale that last for a longer period of time. So like if they have an event that runs 2 or 3 weeks that requires you beating multiple stages of intense boss fights, or if they have events that are heavily story influenced, that have, you know, lots of interesting conversations with characters that you can enjoy and, you know, just spend time with, then I think that those things could pace out the content well enough to keep people interested, you know, while they're waiting for another big content update. But yeah, that remains my big concern. That is my only concern. I think that the formula that they've created for this game is going to work. I think that the main content being the story, with sort of like the side emphasis on the content. Once you're done with the story, you just sort of go off and do, you know, your simulated universe, your dailies, your forgotten halls. You can fight the weekly bosses again for rewards. But yeah, you know, it's all energy based. So this is a game you're going to play maybe an hour or two a day at the most. And at the very least, you'll be doing your dailies in 5 to 10 minutes and, you know, spending your energy with the auto battle system, and then you're hopping off. All right, so now I want to read those beautiful, wonderful comments that I got on my last video, on my first impressions video. So this is something that I'm going to start doing regularly in all of my videos. I want to start sharing the comments that I get, because I get so many good, well thought out comments where oftentimes the people in my community say the things that I want to say better than I can say them. So this is a good opportunity for me to just share some of these, you know, interesting ideas or thoughts or whatevers, and yeah, just get them brain juices flowing. All right, let's get going here. First up is Dante, longtime supporter of the channel. Love to see it. He said, I started Star Rail and I must admit it reminded me in some ways to some of the old turn-based single-player games that I used to play. Paper Mario Thousand Year Door, which I definitely played and enjoyed. Super Paper Mario, definitely played and enjoyed. And Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga, which is an incredible series of games. And for the most part, I like it and I can see myself having casual fun with it. I don't think I'll take it as seriously as I take Genshin, but I can see myself enjoying it from time to time. I might enjoy it more whenever it launches on the PSN. Hoyo announced that they would, but they didn't specify when. Thanks for your review. Great to hear your thoughts. Keep it up. Looking forward to more. Yeah, so I totally understand that perspective where it's sort of like a really fun turn-based experience that does feel very reminiscent of the traditional turn-based experience with like a fresh story, fresh lore. And I think that the idea of, you know, treating it kind of like a fun, casual experience, story experience on the side of whatever you're doing, whether that's Genshin or whatever other game you're playing, is a totally valid way to approach the game. I think viewing this as a main game that you're gonna grind for 6 hours a day. Like, no, it's literally not. It's just not. So good thoughts there. Next up, we have B-Storm. I think it's B-Stormia. The Storm. I don't know. They said this has a really strong old school Final Fantasy before Final Fantasy VIII vibe to it with modern touches and major quality of life improvements. I think it's going to do well with players who like Genshin but don't like the action style combat for whatever reason, or who don't have as much time to devote to doing lots of exploration or grinding in the world in general. It looks like it's meant to be more casual, meaning less of a time investment required than Genshin and all the other action RPGs out there right now, and that's not a bad thing. I got to agree that the experience is pretty focused, and for that reason, it often feels like you're constantly doing something important in the game, or like you're completing an objective, and then when you run out, you just log off and you're done. It's very clean. There isn't a lot of grinding that you can do on the side. So when you're done spending your energy and you're done with what you're done for the day, you don't have that FOMO feeling of like, oh man, I should probably spend an hour farming mobs or doing this other thing because I really need to. Or like with Genshin, you finish your story and there's a lot of exploration in the game. You kind of feel like you should be doing that. You feel like you should be out looting those chests because that's just primo gems that are not in your possession right now, so you want to go get them. But there's really not a lot of that in Star Rail. There is some light exploration. Like if you want to spend 15 minutes, you can probably mop up almost every chest in a single zone in like 15 minutes. Yeah, you just do that to each zone in little chunks, and before you know it, you've got all the chests in the game. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, we live in an era where every game is trying to be your main game. Every game is trying to take up 6 hours a day, and every game has a season pass and all of these grindy systems that you have to put hundreds of hours into. So it is kind of nice to see it be a more focused experience. And now I don't want you to think that I'm only going to show positive comments. I will show a variety of comments because this is all about open discourse. So this one comes from user Lubat, who says, I mean, it's an okay game. There's nothing that makes it unique. I feel the gacha element is literally just a scam. It's just a single player RPG. It doesn't need gacha. Zero multiplayer, so no need to have any kind of competitive like monetization system. Final Fantasy still does it better, plus I don't have all these janky monetary systems in play. The gameplay is very repetitive and boring after a while, and even as an avid reader, the amount of reading in this game is excessive. It's up there with Elder Scrolls. It's going to be dead in a month after everyone beats it. They are really going to need to step up something to keep us interested. I'm aggravated by the gacha and disenchanted with the game as a whole already, and the game is a whopping 1 day old. That ain't good. So I will say that there's a lot of truth to this comment, and obviously everyone has a different perspective on the game at this point. Some people are willing to be more charitable, some people are not willing to be more charitable. So let's start from the beginning there, that there's nothing that makes it unique. I will say that the combat is pretty basic. There's not a lot going on that sets it apart in the combat side of things from other games. Really, what I feel sets it apart is building the characters in different ways, which may or may not really be all that interesting for people, to be totally honest. Now, the next part of their statement is that the gacha element is feeling sort of out of place to them because there's no multiplayer, so there's no real way to show off your characters. Now, there is a single little bit of multiplayer in the sense that you can put your unit up for support, and then in certain game modes, people can use your unit as a support unit, and you get minuscule rewards for them doing that. But that doesn't improve your gameplay at all. That doesn't increase your gameplay at all. It's just a button that you click, and it's not very interesting at all. So there's really no multiplayer incentive. There's no PvP incentive to gacha. For me personally, this is something that I actually like. I know that a lot of people feel that gacha is sort of a system designed to flex on people who don't have the money. So most people feel like gacha games are PvP games where you spend money to win. But in my personal opinion, I think that maybe single player games don't need gacha, but I don't mind gacha in a single player game so long as the monetary system is accessible for free-to-play players. Because to me, it's not about whether it's loot boxes or gacha or the specific system itself. It's more about whether the system is fair to the player and people that spend time and invest time in the game, whether they can complete the game without spending money. So they kind of go on to say that the Final Fantasy sort of does combat better, and the amount of story in the game, or the amount of reading in the game, is excessive. Now, I sort of did talk about this. The amount of story in the beginning was excessive, and I do feel like it did hit like Elder Scrolls Online levels of sitting there reading text after text after text after text. Yeah, I mean, I get it. Like, some people are going to totally bounce off of that. Some people are going to absolutely bounce off of that. I'll be honest, like, I'm not even reading everything that I find. I've probably found more books and readables in this game than I have found treasure chests. And I've read maybe 3 or 4 things that I've picked up. I do not read the majority of the things that I pick up, because if I did, it'd be a lot. I'd probably, burn myself out on reading. Like, it's a lot to read. So, for people that want a very visual experience, this game is going to be pretty boring to them. And I can totally understand where Lubat is coming from with their comment here, and how they don't really feel like it grabbed them. The gacha kind of aggravates them, and they just don't really feel like there's anything to do after you beat the game. It's sort of repetitive, boring. So I can understand where a lot of these thoughts are coming from. This sort of sounds like just someone who may not enjoy what the game has to offer. Okay, so we're going to finish off with Akira here. And Akira says, even though it's been like a day or two, I personally find as much enjoyment in my first day playing Honkai Star Rail as my first couple months playing Genshin. I was hyped for the game, but not to the degree that everyone felt for Genshin initially, but I was actually surprised by how much I'm enjoying the game. I'm in my later 20s, and I'm already having an attention span of a goldfish and can't sit down to play games or watch shows for more than an hour at a time. But Honkai Star Rail, I sat down from the time I get back from work till I slept. I felt burned out from Genshin, just in general, and since I was playing it for so long and the open world felt like a little too much for me and my hard drive space, so Honkai Star Rail as a more linear turn-based RPG fits my niche very nicely, especially as a Persona fan with all the goofiness in the dialogue and animations. I'm a little bit opposite. I get exhausted reading Genshin dialogue, especially with the R&R quest and everything. This is probably the first and only time I play a new live service game on launch, so Honkai Star Rail would feel a little bit more special to me in that regard. I love how March 7th and Danhong felt like a group of travel companions. They bounce off each other well with the MC compared to just one in Paimon. Nevertheless, thank you for giving your honest opinions. This game is niche compared to Genshin. I understand that turn-based games in general are not for everybody. Okay, so this is a really good, really well thought out comment. I always appreciate Akira's comments, always really well thought out. So I do want to point to a specific part of this though, how they mentioned that March 7th and Danhong felt like a group of travel companions more so than just Paimon. I have to admit that this game has often felt more like a Tales of title, like a Bandai Namco title, in the sense that it feels like it's more focused on the group party experience of the MC interacting with a bunch of different people. And that has been a pretty refreshing thing. I will not lie that once the story itself picks up, it's kind of refreshing not to have Paimon rehash literally everything that happens, because that is an issue with Genshin where, you're 300 hours in the story and Paimon is still rehashing every single thing that happens as if you're a child. And now I understand that Genshin does have a younger audience, and some people, it's kind of designed for that, where it's like, maybe you need a refresher, maybe you need a recap, and Paimon's here to save the day. But yeah, I feel like the dialogue is more natural because of that. But yeah, you can see how there are different reactions from different people to the experience of the game, and there's good and bad. There are people that are definitely going to bounce off of it, and there are people that are going to fall in love with the story and the world, and they're going to appreciate the fact that the game doesn't demand a whole lot of your time. And with that, I'm gonna go ahead and start wrapping up this video. Thank you everybody. If you want to leave your comments and have a chance for them to be highlighted in my next video, then you're more than welcome to leave them down below. This will probably be the last time I share my just direct thoughts on the game. I'm doing a series for Genshin where I record my weekly gameplay, and then at the end of the week I'm gonna post a video saying like, this week I played Genshin, and then I'm gonna share all the gameplay, or not all of it, but like the important gameplay plus my thoughts on what happened that week or whatever. Like, it's gonna be a fun series. I'm considering doing the same thing for Honkai Star Rail as well. Anyway, if you got to this point, thank you so much for watching. And I've got a Discord, I've got a Patreon, lots of wonderful wonderful stuff going on here. I'm trying to work on more Patreon incentives, but if you'd like to be a channel member, we've got emotes. I do live streams on Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday. Would love to see you there. Tuesday, Thursday is Genshin. Sunday is Honkai Star Rail. And yeah, Discord, join it. We've got friendly people there. Until next time, stay healthy, stay hydrated. Peace.